Good morning, my friends. It is day 52 and it's Saturday morning, the 23rd of May 2020. As I look out the study window this morning, it is dull and overcast, and what a day it was yesterday. I think there's more to come today, so be safe wherever you are today. So Song of Songs, chapter 1, verses 1 to 17. But now look, I am only going to cover two verses today, verses 7 to 8. But again, as I said to you yesterday, please follow the notes in your book, because I will be looking at something different in this, and I'll be looking at seeing where we can find Christ in the Song of Songs. So let me read two verses to you here, verses 7 to 8, and it says this: "Tell me, you whom I love, where you graze your flock, and where you rest your sheep at midday. Why should I be like a veiled woman beside the flocks of your friends?" Friends, verse 8, if you do not know, most beautiful of women, follow the tracks of the sheep and graze your young goats by the tents of the shepherds. The confidence and well-being that we can have in trusting Jesus, our shepherd king. In these verses we see Solomon as a shepherd king. And for the lady in the verses, this is all that she requires. And when he's not about, she says, "Why should I be like a veiled woman beside the flocks of your friends?" In other words, she loses her identity. She just blends in with everybody else. She loses her self-worth. She loses her identity, her individuality. She cannot be herself whenever he is not around. And she doesn't really like it. She longs to be with him. And he, in verse 8, lets her know where he can be found. He says, follow the tracks of the sheep. And of course, the sheep follow the tracks of the shepherd. The good shepherd too. You see, friends, strange as it may seem in reading this book here, but for this whole theme, this whole promise and hope of a shepherd king, it's a gold mine that runs through the Old Testament and the New Testament. Moses, for example, before God told him, get yourself down to Egypt and to Pharaoh and tell him to let my people go, he was a shepherd in exile, before shepherding over 1 million exiled slaves. God then chose and called the youngest son of a man called Jesse, his son David. We read that in 1 Samuel 16. Wasn't David the shepherd boy? Far too small for armour to be fitted to him, and yet he was the one who would kill Goliath, before going on to become Israel's greatest ever king. And didn't this shepherd boy David, didn't he receive a promise from God that he would have a descendant of whom God said in 2 Samuel 7 and 13, I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. This, of course, was King Jesus. You see, friends, a life placed in God's hands is a powerful thing. And the secret is to follow the shepherd. And even sheep know that. And yet, isn't it strange that we as intelligent and even godly people need reminded of this constantly? Oh, friends, to have the natural instinct of sheep and just simply follow. Wouldn't that be something? David would write that beautiful psalm, Psalm 23, we looked at it a couple of weeks back, which speaks of the Lord as our shepherd. And then in Ezekiel 34, the Lord promises people, we can read this in verses 22 to 23. Here's what he said: I will rescue my flock. They shall no longer be a prey. And I will judge between sheep and sheep. And I will set up over them one shepherd, my servant David. And he shall feed them. He shall feed them and be their shepherd. And of course, from that royal bloodline of David came Jesus, portrayed as we know in Micah chapter 5, 2-4. We read this often at Christmas, where we read of the promised Messiah. It says, Bethlehem, you are small among the clans of Judah. One will come from you who will be ruler over Israel for me. His origin is from antiquity, from eternity. In other words, Jesus, there was never a time when he didn't exist. There's never a time that he will not exist. He has always been there. And goes on to say here, and he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they shall dwell secure. For now we shall be great to the ends of the earth. Reminds me of that lovely hymn, Sheep May Safely Grace. The promise of Scripture, the promises of Scripture are always fulfilled. But surely the promise and fulfillment of Jesus is the greatest of all. This, the Son of David, whom the Bible calls the Good Shepherd in John chapter 10 and 11, the Great Shepherd in Hebrews 13, and the Chief Shepherd in 1 Peter 5 and 4. And Solomon says in verse 8, he says, look, if you do not know, most beautiful of women, follow the tracks of the sheep. Read on in Revelation 7 and 17, and this shepherd that we are speaking of is the Lamb who is at the centre of the throne. You see, Jesus in all of the Bible, right from Genesis, right through to Revelation, right through into all eternity. This is a verse in Revelation here that has brought so much comfort to those who have lost loved ones, because the promise of God as shepherd goes with those of his flock beyond the grave and into eternity. Now let's read what it says. It says, for the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. The Good Shepherd goes with us, friends, when we're saved on into eternity, and we follow him there. Did you see that it says on here? And we will guide them. He will guide them. Even in heaven, friends, we will still follow the tracks of the sheep behind the Good Shepherd. Only this time it will be a natural instinct to us with our renewed hearts and minds. And what a joy, and what a day that will be, my friends, to be in the presence of God. Surely Jesus, friends, is this glorious shepherd king in Revelations, the bridegroom depicted here in the Song of Songs, the one from verse 7 whom we ought to love, the one who gives us our identity and calls us to follow him like humble sheep in the tracks of his leading, wherever that may be. He is surely the one who cares for his sheep, who just being with them, with him, scatters all of our fears, because he has promised that I will never leave you nor forsake you. David, again, as we come to an end in Psalm 91, beautiful psalm. Read it after this little talk today, friends. It's beautiful. Psalm 91. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. Friends, only a fool in these days in which we are living would not draw near to this shepherd king and find protection, security, and shade and shelter from the world. 1 Peter 2 and 21, Peter's great. Peter says, for to this you have been called. God has called all of us to this, hasn't he? Because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you might what? Follow in his steps. There's that following in the steps again. Verse 25, he goes even further and he says, "For you were straying like sheep, but have now returned to the shepherd and the overseer of your souls." Do you see the tie-up between them, friends? Isn't Scripture wonderful that way? Here in the Song of Songs, we find a faithful and a loving shepherd, a shepherd king whom the people can love, trust, draw near to and follow. Here we find a shepherd king who points us to Jesus because he is, in fact, Jesus. My friends, considering all of these things, the Lord bless you real good this day as you seek to follow the Master in his tracks. Amen.